September 15, 1944. Maintenance Depot, 3rd Army Sector, Eastern France. Staff Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann's hands moved mechanically as he catalogued captured American equipment, but his eyes kept returning to the machine gun mounted on the disabled M4 Sherman's turret. The weapon gleamed dully in the afternoon light, its perforated barrel jacket and massive receiver unlike anything in the Wehrmacht arsenal. This cannot be their standard armament. No army would mount weapons this heavy on every vehicle. But the evidence surrounded him. 23 captured American vehicles lined the depot yard. 23 different platforms, tanks, half-tracks, armored cars, even a record truck. And every single one carried the same weapon. Hoffmann approached the Sherman and ran his hand along the barrel. Cold, heavy. The barrel alone had to weigh 15 kilograms, maybe more. He examined the ammunition box. Cartridges the size of a man's middle finger, each one topped with a projectile that looked capable of punching through brick walls. The feed mechanism drew his attention next. Brilliantly simple, reliable. American engineering at its most pragmatic. No unnecessary complexity, just functional brutality designed for one purpose: delivering devastating firepower at ranges German light machine guns couldn't match. Hoffmann had seen what these weapons did to German vehicles. The SDKFZ 251 half-track, 3 rows over, bore witness. A neat line of holes punched through armor that was supposed to protect against rifle fire. Each hole the diameter of a coin, the metal around each puncture bent inward like paper. He'd heard the stories from the survivors of the Falaise pocket, how American gunners had opened fire at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, how the big machine guns had torn through Hanomag half-tracks and SDKFC armored cars as if their armor were tin foil, how the distinctive rhythmic hammering sound preceded death with mechanical certainty. German soldiers had begun to call it the most feared weapon they faced. Not American tanks, not fighter bombers, but this machine gun that seemed to be mounted on everything the Americans fielded. What Hoffmann didn't know, couldn't know, as he stood in that depot yard with autumn sun casting long shadows across captured equipment, was that he was examining one of nearly 2 million identical weapons. He didn't know that this machine gun had been specifically designed to kill at ranges exceeding 1 mile. He didn't know that Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring had reportedly stated that if Germany had possessed this weapon, the Battle of Britain might have turned out differently. And he certainly didn't know that the weapon before him represented a design philosophy so fundamentally different from German engineering doctrine that it would help define the American way of war for the next century. This is the story of how one machine gun became Germany's nightmare, and why German troops learned to dread the sound of Ma Deuce more than any other weapon on the battlefield. The journey to Hoffmann's discovery had begun 27 years earlier, in 1917, when the nature of warfare changed forever. General John Joseph Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in France, watched German aircraft and light armored vehicles operate with relative impunity against American positions. Existing American weapons, the M1903 Springfield rifle and M1917 Browning .30 caliber machine gun, proved inadequate against these threats. Pershing needed something more powerful. Something that could reach out and destroy armored targets at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. He turned to John Moses Browning, already legendary for designing the M1911 pistol and the M1917 machine gun. Pershing's specifications were demanding: a machine gun firing a cartridge powerful enough to penetrate light armor at combat ranges, capable of sustained automatic fire, reliable enough for military service, and light enough to be man-portable or vehicle-mounted. The cartridge alone presented unprecedented challenges. It needed to deliver sufficient kinetic energy to defeat armor while remaining manageable in an automatic weapon. Browning began work immediately. By 1918, working at Colt's testing facilities in Hartford, Connecticut, he had developed a prototype firing a massive .50 caliber cartridge, the .50 Browning machine gun round, designated 12.7 by 99 millimeters. The cartridge measured 138 millimeters in overall length. The projectile alone weighed 42.7 grams. When fired, it left the muzzle at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 13,144 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. For comparison, the standard .30-06 rifle cartridge delivered 2,820 foot-pounds, less than one-quarter the energy. The first version, designated M1921, entered limited production as a water-cooled weapon weighing 109 pounds without its tripod. The water jacket added reliability during sustained fire, but made the weapon cumbersome. Browning continued refining the design, but on November 26, 1926, he collapsed and died of heart failure while working at the Fabrique Nationale factory in Herstal, Belgium. He was 71 years old. The weapon that would define his legacy remained incomplete. Engineers at Colt continued Browning's work. They developed an air-cooled barrel with a heavy profile that could sustain fire without water cooling. The barrel featured longitudinal fins and a perforated jacket to maximize cooling airflow. In 1933, this improved version entered service as the M2 Heavy Barrel, weighing 84 pounds without its tripod, 25 pounds lighter than the water-cooled M1921, but still capable of firing 450 to 550 rounds per minute with an effective range of 1,830 meters against point targets and 2,000 meters against area targets. The specifications were remarkable for a crew-served weapon. Overall length, 65 inches. Barrel length, 45 inches. The M2 used a short recoil-operated, air-cooled design with a disintegrating metal link belt feed system. The weapon could fire from an open bolt, which prevented cook-offs during sustained fire. The barrel could be quickly changed in the field, a critical feature for maintaining sustained fire rates. Maximum range with the standard M2 ball ammunition exceeded 7,400 meters, over 4.5 miles. At 1,000 yards, the .50 BMG round retained more kinetic energy than a .30-06 round possessed at the muzzle. But the weapon remained relatively uncommon in American arsenals through the 1930s. The interwar military budget prioritized rifles and light machine guns. Only specialized units received M2s, primarily for anti-aircraft defense. Production remained modest, fewer than 2,000 weapons annually. The M2 seemed destined to be a specialized defensive weapon, relegated to fixed installations and fortress positions. Then, on December 7, 1941, everything changed. At 7:55 in the morning, 183 Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor. Among the chaos and destruction, 2 American servicemen demonstrated the M2's devastating potential against aircraft. Chief Aviation Ordnanceman John William Finn, stationed at Naval Air Station Kaneohe Bay, manned an M2 Browning machine gun mounted in an exposed position. For over 2 hours, wounded multiple times by strafing Japanese fighters, Finn continued firing at attacking aircraft. He later received the Medal of Honor for his actions. Aboard the battleship USS West Virginia, messman 3rd Class Doris "Dory" Miller, an African-American sailor untrained in weapons operation but desperate to fight back, took control of an unmanned M2 Browning anti-aircraft mount. Miller, who had never received gunnery training because the Navy restricted African Americans to steward positions, fired at Japanese aircraft until his ammunition ran out. He later received the Navy Cross, becoming the first African American to receive that decoration. These actions at Pearl Harbor revealed something crucial about the M2. properly employed, it could bring down aircraft. The weapon that Pershing had requested for anti-armor work excelled in the anti-aircraft role. Its 1,830-meter effective range and devastating projectile made it lethal against the relatively fragile aircraft of 1941. And, unlike specialized anti-aircraft weapons, the M2 required minimal training. Point it at the target and pull the trigger. The weapon's mechanical reliability did the rest. The American military establishment took notice. Within weeks of Pearl Harbor, production contracts went out to multiple manufacturers. AC Spark Plug Division of General Motors, Frigidaire, Guide Lamp, Buffalo Arms. By mid-1942, M2 production exceeded 2,000 weapons per week. By 1943, weekly production had reached 5,000 units. The weapons poured off assembly lines and onto every conceivable American platform. Sherman tanks received an M2 on the turret top. Half-tracks mounted single, dual, or even quad M2 configurations. Armored cars carried them. Supply trucks mounted them on improvised ring mounts. PT boats bristled with them. Landing craft added them for fire support. P-51 Mustangs carried 6 of them in their wings. B-17 bombers featured up to 13 .5 caliber positions. Even Jeeps received experimental mounts, though the weight and recoil generally proved excessive for such light vehicles. The philosophy was simple. Put a .5 caliber machine gun on everything that moved and many things that didn't. American doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower at all levels. While German doctrine concentrated heavy weapons at specific points, American doctrine distributed heavy weapons throughout the entire force structure. Every rifle company had weapons platoons with M2s. Every tank had at least one. Every convoy vehicle could carry one. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the M2 had become ubiquitous in American forces. The 12,000 vehicles that landed with the initial assault waves carried over 15,000 M2 Browning machine guns among them. German defenders, accustomed to facing British forces equipped primarily with .303 caliber weapons, suddenly confronted a wall of .5 caliber fire that could reach their positions from ranges they considered safe. The German experience with American firepower followed a brutal pattern that repeated across every theater where American forces deployed. The lessons came quickly and at terrible cost. In North Africa, November 1942, Wehrmacht and Italian forces first encountered large-scale American M2 deployment during Operation Torch. German reconnaissance reports from the Kasserine Pass battles in February 1943 noted with alarm the prevalence of heavy machine guns on American vehicles. Oberleutnant Hans Joachim Marseille, the famed Luftwaffe ace, reported before his death in September 1942 that American defensive positions featured exceptionally heavy anti-aircraft fire from large-caliber machine guns that forced Luftwaffe fighters to attack from higher altitudes, reducing accuracy. The pattern intensified in Sicily and Italy. German forces conducting reconnaissance of American convoys discovered that attempting to attack supply lines meant facing concentrated fire from dozens of 50 caliber positions. A single American convoy of 50 vehicles might carry 20 or more M2 Brownings. German doctrine emphasized attacking supply lines with small, mobile forces, motorcycle reconnaissance units, light armored cars, or mechanized infantry in half-tracks. These tactics had worked brilliantly against British convoys in North Africa, where most vehicles carried only rifles or light machine guns. Against American convoys, these tactics proved suicidal. The SKD-FZ-222 armored car, mainstay of German reconnaissance, featured armor between 8 and 14.5 millimeters. The M2's armor-piercing incendiary round could penetrate 23 millimeters of armor at 500 meters. German armored cars approaching American convoys found themselves under accurate fire at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters, far beyond the effective range of their 20mm KWK-30 autocannons. The 50 caliber rounds punched through their frontal armor and devastated their interiors. The SKD FZ-251 half-track, used extensively by Wehrmacht Panzergrenadier units, fared no better. Its armor ranged from 6 to 14.5 millimeters, adequate against rifle fire, useless against 50 caliber armor-piercing rounds. Wehrmacht after-action reports from Italy documented repeated instances of half-track-mounted infantry units being effectively destroyed by American heavy machine gun fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. German light tanks presented slightly better protection, but not much. The Panzer II, still in limited service, featured armor between 14.5 and 35 millimeters. Its side and rear armor fell well within the M2's penetration capability. Even the Panzer III and Panzer IV, mainstays of German armored forces, featured side and rear armor of 30 millimeters, vulnerable to 50 caliber armor-piercing fire at combat ranges under 400 meters. German tank commanders learned to dread American defensive positions where hull-down tanks and prepared positions allowed M2 gunners to target vulnerable side and rear armor. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical damage. German troops began recognizing the distinctive sound of M2 fire, a deeper, slower rate of fire than German MG-42 machine guns, each round creating a distinctive crack as it broke the sound barrier. That sound meant death, at ranges German infantry weapons couldn't match. Soldiers caught in the open by M2 fire had no options. The rounds would punch through brick walls, penetrate sandbag fortifications, and destroy light cover that stopped rifle bullets. Veterans learned to identify vehicle types by sound alone, and the sound of multiple M2s meant immediate retreat or face annihilation. In the European theater after D-Day, the pattern continued with industrial efficiency. The Normandy bocage fighting demonstrated another M2 advantage, the ability to suppress enemy positions while American infantry maneuvered. German MG-42 teams, justly famous for their devastating firepower, found themselves outranged by American 50 caliber positions. An MG-42's effective range against point targets was approximately 800 meters. The M2 could deliver accurate fire at twice that distance. American doctrine emphasized using M2s to suppress German machine gun positions while rifle companies advanced to flanking positions. The Battle of the Bulge, December 1944 through January 1945, provided perhaps the clearest demonstration of the M2's tactical dominance. German forces, equipped primarily with weapons designed for close-range combat in urban and forested terrain, found themselves engaged at long range by American defensive positions. The frozen, snow-covered terrain offered little cover. M2 gunners could observe German movements at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters and engage effectively beyond 1,800 meters. German infantry advancing across open ground faced what survivors described as an impenetrable wall of fire. Wehrmacht field reports compiled after the Ardennes offensive noted repeatedly that attacks against American positions were frequently broken up by concentrated heavy machine gun fire before forces could close to effective assault range. The reports documented that American units, even when outnumbered and surrounded, could bring devastating firepower to bear through their vehicle-mounted and crew-served 50 caliber weapons. Small American units, properly positioned with adequate ammunition, could hold off much larger German forces simply through the range and volume of their 50 caliber firepower. The Luftwaffe learned similar lessons at terrible cost. American bomber formations bristling with 50 caliber defensive positions proved devastatingly effective against German fighters. A single B-17G Flying Fortress carried 13 50 caliber positions. A combat box formation of 36 bombers could bring 468 machine guns to bear against attacking fighters. German pilots found that the only effective attack approach, head-on passes from 12 o'clock high, required flying directly into concentrated fire from dozens of weapons. Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring, watching his fighter force bleed away against American bomber formations, reportedly made a statement that captured German respect for the M2. If the German Air Force had the Browning 50 caliber machine gun, the Battle of Britain would have turned out differently. Whether apocryphal or genuine, the sentiment reflected Luftwaffe operational experience. German bombers and fighters equipped with rifle-caliber defensive armament proved pathetically vulnerable compared to American aircraft with 50 caliber defensive guns. But the pattern's most devastating aspect wasn't technical, it was numerical. American industrial capacity produced M2 Brownings at rates German planners couldn't comprehend. Where Germany carefully manufactured specialized weapons in limited numbers, America mass-produced universal weapons in quantities that made them unavoidable. By 1944, German forces couldn't engage American units without facing concentrated 50 caliber fire. It wasn't a question of encountering the weapon occasionally, it was omnipresent, mounted on every American vehicle, emplaced at every American position, carried by every American unit. January 26, 1945, near Holtzwihr, France, the Colmar Pocket. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, commanding Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, stood in the snow and watched two German companies, approximately 250 men, advancing supported by 6 tanks through the frozen forest. Murphy was 19 years old, weighed 145 pounds, and had already earned the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 2 Bronze Stars. What he was about to do would earn him the Medal of Honor and create the definitive demonstration of the M2 Browning's devastating effectiveness in the hands of a determined soldier. The situation was desperate. Company B had been reduced to 19 men. German forces had been attacking continuously for days, attempting to break through American lines defending the southern approach to the Colmar Pocket. Murphy's position faced collapse. German artillery had destroyed most of the American defensive positions. The company was ordered to withdraw. Murphy refused. As his men pulled back to secondary positions, he remained forward with his artillery observer and began directing artillery fire onto the advancing German infantry. The Germans kept coming. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, a German shell struck the M10 tank destroyer, providing fire support for Murphy's position. The M10 tank destroyer burst into flames, its crew bailing out and running for cover. The vehicle burned, ammunition beginning to cook off in the intense heat. Murphy did something that defied both logic and survival instinct. He climbed onto the burning tank destroyer. The M10's turret-mounted M2 Browning remained intact and loaded. Murphy swung the weapon toward the advancing German infantry, now less than 100 meters away, and opened fire. For the next hour, Murphy stood on the burning vehicle, wounded in the leg by German fire, calling artillery adjustments into his field telephone with one hand while firing the M2 with the other. The machine gun's sustained fire rate of 450 to 550 rounds per minute meant Murphy was firing approximately 7 to 9 rounds per second into the German infantry formation. The .50 caliber rounds, delivering 13,144 foot-pounds of kinetic energy each, didn't just wound, they destroyed. A hit to the torso would tear a man apart. Hits to limbs would sever them. The weapon's effective range of 1,830 meters meant Murphy could engage German soldiers at ranges where they couldn't effectively return fire with rifles or submachine guns. German forces attempted to flank Murphy's position. He rotated the M2 and swept their positions with sustained bursts. Soldiers attempting to use trees for cover discovered that .50 caliber rounds would punch through tree trunks 30 centimeters in diameter. Those who dived into shallow depressions found the weapon's plunging fire could reach them even in prone positions. The combination of Murphy's accurate fire and the artillery strikes he continued directing broke the German attack. When Murphy finally climbed down from the burning M10, its ammunition nearly exhausted, approximately 50 German soldiers lay dead. The surviving German forces had withdrawn. Murphy had single-handedly stopped a company-strength attack using one M2 Browning machine gun. German survivors later reported to interrogators that they had never experienced such devastating, accurate fire from a single weapon. They had assumed they faced multiple machine gun positions, not one teenager standing on a burning vehicle. Murphy's action at Holtzwihr represented the ultimate expression of the M2 Browning's design philosophy: overwhelming firepower delivered with mechanical reliability at ranges that left enemy forces with no effective response. But it also revealed something German forces had learned through bitter experience across every theater. The M2 Browning didn't just kill enemy soldiers. It dominated tactical situations in ways no other infantry portable weapon could match. The examination of captured M2 Brownings by German ordnance experts had begun in earnest by late 1943. Weapons captured in North Africa and Italy made their way to testing facilities where engineers attempted to understand why this weapon proved so effective. The findings shocked German technical staff. First, the weapon was almost absurdly reliable. German engineers tested captured M2s under conditions that would have destroyed most German weapons. They fired tens of thousands of rounds without cleaning or maintenance. The weapons continued functioning. They exposed them to sand, mud, and water. The weapons continued functioning. The short recoil operation, combined with the weapon's substantial mass, created a firing cycle that was nearly impossible to disrupt. The quick change barrel system meant that even when barrels wore out or overheated, they could be replaced in seconds and firing resumed. Second, the ammunition proved devastatingly effective. German engineers examined the .50 BMG cartridge family and found multiple specialized variants: the M2 ball round for general use, the M1 incendiary round containing 68 grains of incendiary mixture, the M8 armor-piercing incendiary round featuring a hardened steel penetrator core and an incendiary charge that ignited after penetration, the M20 armor-piercing incendiary tracer round, combining penetration, incendiary effect, and trajectory visibility. Each variant addressed a specific tactical requirement, and all could be fired from the same weapon without modification. The armor-piercing capability particularly concerned German ordnance experts. Testing revealed that the M8 armor-piercing incendiary round could penetrate 23 millimeters of armor at 500 meters, striking at perpendicular, more than enough to defeat the armor on most German light vehicles and even the side and rear armor of medium tanks at close range. The incendiary charge created catastrophic secondary effects inside penetrated vehicles, often igniting fuel or ammunition. Third, the weapon's weight, 84 pounds for the gun alone, 44 pounds for the tripod, seemed excessive by German standards but created unexpected advantages. The substantial mass absorbed recoil, making the weapon surprisingly controllable during sustained fire. Gunners could deliver accurate fire at extreme ranges because the weapon's mass dampened the vibration and jump that plagued lighter machine guns. The weight also contributed to the weapon's mechanical durability. Components could be manufactured to looser tolerances than lighter weapons required because the mass and strength of the receiver absorbed stresses that would crack lighter designs. German engineers compared the M2 to German equivalents and found no true comparable weapon. The MG 151/20 20mm autocannon came closest in terms of firepower, but it weighed 42 kilograms and required vehicle mounting. The MG 131 13mm machine gun matched the M2's caliber class, but fired a less powerful cartridge and proved less reliable. Germany had no weapon that combined the M2's range, firepower, reliability, and portability in a single package. The most disturbing finding came from examining American production philosophy. German engineers discovered that the M2 was designed for mass production by non-specialized manufacturers. The weapon's components featured generous tolerances and simple shapes that could be produced on standard industrial machinery. The weapon could be assembled by semi-skilled workers. There were no hand-fitted parts requiring master gunsmiths. Everything was interchangeable. An M2 receiver manufactured by Frigidaire would accept a barrel manufactured by AC Sparkplug and a bolt assembly manufactured by Guide Lamp without modification. This revealed the fundamental difference between German and American weapons philosophy. German weapons were precisely engineered products requiring skilled craftsmen and specialized manufacturing facilities. American weapons were industrial products designed for mass manufacture and universal interchangeability by companies that had never built weapons before the war. The implications were staggering. Germany could not produce weapons fast enough to match losses. America could produce weapons faster than they could deploy them. German reports from the Ardennes offensive documented that destroyed American units were replaced with fully equipped formations within days, while German units receiving replacement equipment often received weapons of mixed manufacture that didn't share interchangeable parts. The journey to the M2's dominance began with a fundamental question that John Moses Browning understood better than any other weapons designer of his era. What single characteristic matters most in a military weapon? German designers prioritized precision and efficiency. British designers emphasized reliability and simplicity. Russian designers focused on mass production and durability under extreme conditions. Browning chose effectiveness, the ability to accomplish the mission regardless of conditions. When General Pershing specified his requirements in 1917, a weapon capable of defeating light armor and aircraft at long range while remaining reliable enough for field service, Browning recognized that meeting those requirements would require abandoning conventional machine gun design principles. Traditional machine guns prioritized sustained fire rates and ammunition economy. Pershing's weapon needed to prioritize kinetic energy and range. The mathematics were brutally simple. To penetrate armor at 500 meters, a projectile needed sufficient mass and velocity to deliver approximately 2,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at impact. To reach 1,500 meters and retain effectiveness, the projectile needed excellent ballistic coefficient, determined by mass, diameter, and shape. To cycle an automatic weapon, the cartridge needed sufficient energy to operate the action reliably under adverse conditions. These requirements could not be met with existing rifle cartridges. Browning needed to develop an entirely new cartridge. The .50 BMG cartridge that emerged represented an elegant solution to impossible requirements. The 12.7 by 99 mm cartridge case held 239 grains of powder. The 661 grain projectile achieved 2,900 feet per second muzzle velocity. Kinetic energy at muzzle, 13,144 foot-pounds. Retained energy at 1,000 yards, over 5,000 foot-pounds, more than a .3006 rifle cartridge possessed at the muzzle. The ballistic coefficient of 0.670 meant the projectile maintained velocity better than virtually any other small arms round in existence. But firing such a powerful cartridge in an automatic weapon created unprecedented challenges. The recoil energy exceeded anything in military service. Each shot generated approximately 100 foot-pounds of free recoil energy, roughly 3 times that of a .3006 rifle. Multiply that by 450 to 550 rounds per minute, and the weapon had to absorb and control over 45,000 foot-pounds of recoil energy per minute during sustained fire. Browning's solution was characteristically simple. Make the weapon heavy enough to absorb the punishment. The M2's 84-pound weight wasn't excessive, it was necessary. The massive receiver, machined from solid steel, absorbed recoil forces that would have destroyed lighter designs. The short recoil operation used the barrel's rearward movement during firing to unlock the bolt and extract the spent case. The barrel returned to battery under spring pressure, chambering the next round. The entire cycle occurred in approximately 0.11 seconds, fast enough for sustained automatic fire, slow enough to maintain control. The barrel design revealed Browning's understanding of thermal management. The 45-inch barrel featured a heavy profile weighing approximately 15 pounds, 3 times heavier than a rifle barrel of comparable length. The perforated barrel jacket allowed cooling air to flow over the barrel surface during fire. The quick-change barrel system meant that when barrels overheated, typically after 100 to 150 rounds of sustained fire, they could be replaced in under 10 seconds. A 2-man crew with spare barrels could maintain sustained fire indefinitely, limited only by ammunition supply. The feed system demonstrated American industrial pragmatism. German machine guns used fabric belts or metal drum magazines. Both had limitations. Fabric belts deteriorated in moisture. Metal drum magazines were heavy and limited capacity. The M2's disintegrating link belt solved both problems. Each round was held between 2 curved metal links. When the round was chambered, the links separated and fell away. The belt required no recovery or maintenance. Empty links could be discarded. New belts could be assembled in the field by pressing rounds between fresh links. The system was simple, reliable, and required minimal training. Browning made a critical decision regarding barrel timing that would define the weapon's legendary reliability. He designed the M2 to fire from an open bolt. When the trigger was pulled, the bolt traveled forward, stripped a round from the belt, chambered it, and only then did the firing pin strike the primer. This meant the chamber remained open to cooling air between shots. The system prevented cook-offs, uncontrolled firing caused by heat-induced primer ignition that plagued closed-bolt machine guns during sustained fire. The open bolt design added complexity to the firing cycle, but eliminated a failure mode that could render a weapon uncontrollable in combat. The weapon's timing mechanism, the adjustment that controlled when the bolt locked, required careful setting, but thereafter needed minimal maintenance. Properly timed, the M2 would fire reliably under virtually any condition. The timing adjustment was simple enough that crew members could perform it in the field, but precise enough that once set, the weapon would maintain timing through tens of thousands of rounds. Every design choice reflected Browning's understanding that military weapons must function regardless of training, maintenance, or conditions. The M2 could be assembled and disassembled without special tools. The headspace, the critical distance between bolt face and chamber, could be checked and adjusted using a simple gauge. The weapon could be fired partially submerged if necessary. It could be fired after being dropped, buried in mud, or exposed to extreme temperatures. German engineers testing captured M2s documented that the weapon continued functioning under conditions that would have rendered German weapons inoperable. The decision to design for mass production by non-specialized manufacturers proved equally critical. In 1940, when American rearmament began in earnest, the United States possessed limited specialized weapons manufacturing capacity. To produce weapons in the quantities anticipated, contracts would have to go to companies with no weapons experience: automotive manufacturers, appliance makers, electrical equipment producers. Browning's design anticipated this requirement. The M2's receiver was a simple rectangular box machined from solid steel bar stock. The bolt was a cylindrical component with simple features. The barrel required precision boring, but no exotic materials. The feed mechanism used stampings and simple springs. Nothing required hand fitting. Everything was designed to be manufactured on standard industrial machinery that every large American manufacturer possessed. Companies that built automotive components could build M2 components using their existing equipment with minimal modification. This design philosophy, universal interchangeability, and production by non-specialists meant that when war came, American industry could rapidly scale M2 production. AC Spark Plug Division of General Motors began M2 production in 1941 despite never having manufactured weapons. They applied automotive production techniques, precision jigs, interchangeable components, assembly line construction, and produced weapons indistinguishable in function from those manufactured by Colt or Browning. Frigidaire, Guide Lamp, and Buffalo Arms followed. By 1943, monthly M2 production exceeded 25,000 weapons, more than Germany's total inventory of comparable heavy machine guns. Browning had created something rare in military history, a weapon that was simultaneously simple enough for mass production and sophisticated enough to dominate its tactical role for nearly a century. The M2 entered service in 1933. As of 2024, 91 years later, it remains in frontline service with the U.S. military and dozens of allied nations. No other weapon system has maintained continuous combat service for nearly a century. The design's fundamental soundness has proven so complete that significant modification has never been necessary. Modern M2s differ from 1933 models primarily in manufacturing techniques, not design features. The mathematics of attrition began immediately upon American entry into the war and continued with relentless consistency until Germany's surrender. The pattern repeated across every engagement, every theater, every type of operation. When German forces encountered concentrated American firepower, the casualties followed predictably. February 14, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Elements of the 10th Panzer Division and Panzergrenadier units attacked American positions held by the 168th Infantry Regiment. The Americans, recently arrived and untested, seemed vulnerable. German forces expected rapid victory. Instead, they encountered defensive positions with carefully emplaced M2 Brownings positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. The German attack pushed through initial positions but ground to a halt when concentrated .50 caliber fire destroyed the supporting half-tracks and armored cars. Without their vehicle support, Panzer Grenadier infantry found themselves pinned down by long-range machine gun fire. The attack failed, with losses exceeding 200 men. June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach, Normandy. German defenders occupying prepared positions on the bluffs overlooking the landing beaches possessed superior fields of fire and protection. American forces landing on the beach appeared doomed. But as landing craft reached shore and lowered their ramps, their M2 Brownings opened fire at German positions. The .50 caliber rounds couldn't penetrate German concrete fortifications, but they could suppress German machine gun positions long enough for infantry to move off the beach. Naval beach battalions brought M2s ashore mounted on vehicles and in ground mounts. These weapons provided the sustained suppressive fire that allowed American infantry to reach the base of the bluffs and begin reducing German positions. Casualty reports documented that German bunkers that continued firing, despite American suppression fire, suffered catastrophic casualties when .50 caliber rounds found firing apertures. Confined spaces meant a single round entering a bunker position could wound multiple defenders. August 7-8, 1944, Mortagne, France. German forces launched Operation Lüttich, a desperate counterattack intended to split American forces and reach the coast. The attack initially made progress, but American defensive positions, anchored by vehicle-mounted and crew-served M2 Brownings, created killing zones that German forces couldn't penetrate. The 30th Infantry Division, positioned on Hill 314, found itself surrounded but refused to surrender. Their vehicle-mounted .50 caliber machine guns provided the firepower that held off repeated German infantry attacks. Over 2 days of fighting, American M2 gunners fired tens of thousands of rounds into German formations attempting to overrun the position. German casualty reports documented losses exceeding 500 men in failed attempts to take Hill 314. American positions held, the counterattack failed, and German forces began their retreat toward the Falaise Pocket. The Battle of the Bulge, December 16, 1944, through January 25, 1945, provided the most comprehensive demonstration of the M2's defensive capability. German forces achieved tactical surprise and initial success, but as American forces recovered and established defensive positions, German attacks repeatedly broke against concentrated .50 caliber fire. Small American units, often significantly outnumbered, held critical road junctions and villages because their M2 Brownings could engage German forces at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters in the open snow-covered terrain. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces possessed over 200 M2 Browning machine guns among their tank, vehicle, and infantry positions. These weapons created an impenetrable defensive perimeter. German infantry attacks across open ground met with withering fire from ranges where German small arms couldn't effectively return fire. German attempts to concentrate forces for breakthrough attacks resulted in catastrophic casualties as American M2 gunners swept their formations with sustained fire. After-action reports documented that German units attacking Bastogne suffered casualty rates exceeding 40% without achieving significant penetration of American defenses. Individual engagements demonstrated the psychological impact of M2 fire. On December 23, 1944, near Chinon, Belgium, elements of the 35th Infantry Division encountered a German column attempting to resupply forces attacking Bastogne. American forces established an ambush position with multiple M2 Brownings covering the road. When the German column entered the kill zone, American gunners opened fire simultaneously. The concentration of .50 caliber fire destroyed the lead and trail vehicles within seconds, trapping the column. German troops attempting to dismount and take cover found that .50 caliber rounds penetrated the thin-skinned supply trucks they were sheltering behind. The engagement lasted approximately 15 minutes. German casualties exceeded 150, American casualties 0. Survivors reported that the intensity and range of the fire made effective response impossible. By the time they located American positions, most of their unit was already destroyed. The air war statistics proved equally devastating for German forces. American bomber formations protected by hundreds of .50 caliber defensive positions inflicted catastrophic losses on attacking Luftwaffe fighters. During the infamous Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid of August 17, 1943, before long-range fighter escorts became available, German fighters pressed home determined attacks against B-17 formations. The 230 attacking B-17s carried approximately 2,990 .50 caliber machine guns. German fighters shot down 36 bombers, but American gunners claimed 288 German aircraft destroyed or damaged. Post-war analysis suggests actual German losses were approximately 25 aircraft destroyed and 30 damaged. Still a 1-to-1 loss ratio, despite the attackers having every tactical advantage. As American fighter escorts became available in 1944, equipped with 6.50 caliber machine guns each, Luftwaffe losses became unsustainable. A P-51 Mustang's 6 M2 Brownings could deliver approximately 54 rounds per second, each round carrying lethal energy out to 1,200 meters. German fighters, primarily equipped with 7.92 mm and 13 mm machine guns, supplemented by 20 mm cannon, possessed superior individual weapon power but inferior total sustained firepower. In turning combat, where accurate cannon fire proved difficult, the P-51's 6.50 calibers could maintain sustained fire while maneuvering. Luftwaffe pilot casualty rates exceeded 50% by late 1944. Experienced German pilots reported that American fighter formations simply overwhelmed German aircraft through superior numbers and firepower, and the primary component of that firepower was the M2 Browning. German attempts to modify tactics to counter M2 effectiveness proved largely futile. Luftwaffe fighters tried standing off beyond .50 caliber range and attacking with rockets and cannon, but this reduced accuracy and gave American gunners time to concentrate fire on approaching aircraft. German ground forces attempted to avoid American positions where possible, but American doctrine placed M2s throughout the force structure, making avoidance impossible. German armored forces tried to engage American positions at ranges beyond .50 caliber effectiveness, but this required holding back light vehicles and reconnaissance elements that were essential for tactical mobility. The weapon's psychological impact proved as devastating as its physical effects. German soldiers developed what American intelligence reports described as .50 caliber psychosis, an intense fear response to the distinctive sound of M2 fire. Veterans learned to recognize the weapon by sound and sought cover immediately. The sound meant immediate danger at ranges where German weapons couldn't effectively return fire. It meant friendly armor was vulnerable. It meant advancing across open ground would be fatal. German units reported significantly reduced combat effectiveness when operating in areas where M2 fire had been encountered previously. Soldiers were reluctant to move, slower to advance, quicker to seek cover. American forces recognized and exploited this psychological advantage. Units in defensive positions would fire occasional bursts from M2s to remind German forces of their presence. Convoys under attack would concentrate M2 fire even against distant targets to demonstrate their defensive capability. Tank commanders would use their turret-mounted M2s to suppress suspected enemy positions before main gun engagement. The psychological effect of .50 caliber fire often caused German forces to withdraw without requiring tank cannon fire. The cumulative effect across 3 years of combat proved catastrophic for German forces. Conservative estimates suggest M2 Brownings accounted for tens of thousands of German casualties directly and contributed to hundreds of thousands more through suppression, vehicle destruction, and psychological impact. The weapon didn't win the war, no single weapon could, but it fundamentally altered the tactical calculations German forces had to make in every engagement with American units. The production statistics revealed a story of American industrial mobilization that German planners couldn't comprehend and couldn't counter. From 1941 through 1945, American manufacturers produced approximately 1.9 million M2 Browning machine guns across multiple variants and configurations. The M2 Heavy Barrel, the standard ground-based version, accounted for approximately 400,000 weapons. Weight, 84 pounds without tripod. Rate of fire, 450 to 550 rounds per minute. Effective range, 1,830 meters. Maximum range, 7,440 meters. These weapons equipped infantry weapons companies, vehicle mounts, and defensive positions throughout American forces. The M2 aircraft variant, featuring a higher rate of fire achieved through modified timing and lighter components, accounted for approximately 1.5 million weapons. These armed American aircraft from single-engine fighters to four-engine bombers. A B-17G Flying Fortress carried 13.5 caliber positions. A B-24 Liberator carried 10. P-47 Thunderbolts carried 8. P-51 Mustangs carried 6. American fighter and bomber production totaled approximately 100,000 aircraft during the war, meaning aircraft M2 production alone exceeded 15 weapons per aircraft produced. The M2 water-cooled variant, retained primarily for naval anti-aircraft use where sustained fire without barrel changes was essential, accounted for a small percentage of production, but remained in service throughout the war on major warships. Ammunition production dwarfed even the impressive weapon production figures. American manufacturers produced approximately 12 billion rounds of .50 BMG ammunition during the war years. This included multiple specialized variants: M2 ball rounds for general use, M1 and M2 armor-piercing incendiary rounds for anti-armor and anti-aircraft work, M1 incendiary rounds for anti-aircraft use, and various tracer rounds for observation of fire. The average American division deployed with approximately 500,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, enough to sustain every M2 in the division firing at combat rates for approximately 40 hours. The mathematics of distribution revealed American doctrinal philosophy. A standard American infantry division in 1944 possessed approximately 150 M2 Browning machine guns across all types and mounts. These were distributed through the division structure: weapons companies in each infantry battalion, anti-aircraft sections, headquarters companies, reconnaissance units, and vehicle mounts throughout the division's transport and armored elements. Compare this to a German infantry division of equal size, which typically possessed fewer than 50 heavy machine guns total, usually MG-34 or MG-42 weapons in tripod mounts, with no equivalent to the M2's range and firepower. American armored divisions possessed even greater M2 concentrations. A typical armored division included over 300 M2 Brownings, one mounted on every tank turret, multiple mounts on half-tracks and armored cars, quad .50 caliber anti-aircraft mounts on specialized vehicles, and infantry battalion weapons companies. An American armored division could bring approximately 165,000 rounds of .5 caliber fire to bear, a volume of fire that German forces had no tactical doctrine to counter. Loss rates for M2 Brownings remained remarkably low compared to other weapon systems. The weapon's mechanical reliability meant that weapons lost in combat were primarily destroyed by enemy action rather than mechanical failure. Weapons captured by German forces often remained functional and pressed into German service. German units equipped with M2s reported them superior to equivalent German weapons in range and reliability. Weapons recovered from destroyed American vehicles were typically repairable with minimal maintenance. The weapon's simple, robust design meant that even heavily damaged examples could often be cannibalized for parts to repair other weapons. Comparative analysis with German weapon systems revealed the gulf between American and German production philosophy. Germany's closest equivalent to the M2, the MG 151/20 20mm autocannon, entered service in 1941 and proved effective in aircraft installations. Total production, approximately 50,000 weapons. The MG 131 13mm machine gun, roughly equivalent in caliber to the M2, entered service in 1938 primarily for aircraft use. Total production, approximately 17,000 weapons. Germany's combined production of heavy machine guns across all types barely exceeded 100,000 weapons, approximately 1/20th of American M2 production alone. The production disparity created tactical impossibilities for German forces. American units destroyed in combat were replaced with fully equipped formations, including full complements of M2 Brownings, within days or weeks. German units suffering equipment losses faced months or years before replacement equipment arrived, and replacement weapons often came from different manufacturers with incompatible parts. American spare parts inventories meant that damaged M2s could be repaired in field maintenance facilities. German weapons requiring major parts replacements had to be sent to depot-level facilities that were increasingly overwhelmed and vulnerable to air attack. The weapon's longevity provided the final testament to their design excellence. Production M2 Brownings manufactured in 1942 remained in service through the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and into the 1980s, over 40 years of frontline service. Many weapons built during World War II remain in service today in reserve units and allied nations, their basic design unchanged for over 80 years. No weapon system in history has maintained such continuous service life. Modern M2s incorporate minor modifications, chrome-plated barrels for improved longevity, improved mounting systems, modern optical sights, but the core design remains John Browning's 1933 specification. Survivor testimony from both sides confirmed the weapon's tactical dominance. Sergeant John Basilone, USMC, earned the Medal of Honor at Guadalcanal in October 1942 for a defensive action in which he and his machine gun section, equipped with water-cooled 1917 30 caliber weapons, held off repeated Japanese attacks. Basilone specifically requested transfer to a weapons company equipped with M2 Brownings before returning to combat, stating that the 50 caliber's range and power made it the only weapon worth having when facing determined enemy attacks. He was killed on Iwo Jima in February 1945 while moving an M2 Browning into position to support the assault. German veterans interviewed after the war uniformly cited American firepower, specifically including the prevalence of 50 caliber weapons, as a primary factor in American tactical superiority. Oberst Hans von Luck, commander of the 125th Panzergrenadier Regiment, wrote in his memoirs that American defensive positions proved nearly impossible to assault frontally because every American position seemed to have heavy machine guns with far greater range than our MG-42s. We could not suppress them before attacking and could not close with them under fire. German tactical doctrine emphasized rapid assault to close with enemy positions before defensive fire became overwhelming. Against positions defended by M2s, German forces found this impossible. The weapon's 1,800-meter effective range meant that they came under accurate fire long before reaching assault range. The weapon created a tactical reality that German forces never effectively countered. American positions could engage German forces at ranges where German infantry weapons were ineffective. American convoys could defend themselves against attacks that would have destroyed British or Russian equivalents. American aircraft possessed defensive firepower that made them far more survivable than German equivalents. And American armored units could bring concentrated fire to bear at ranges that left German light vehicles and infantry vulnerable before they could effectively engage. September 15, 1944. Maintenance Depot, 3rd Army Sector, Eastern France. Staff Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann completed his examination of the captured M2 Browning machine gun as afternoon shadows lengthened across the depot yard. His report would make its way through Wehrmacht channels to Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters, where it would join hundreds of similar reports documenting the devastating effectiveness of American heavy machine guns. The report would note the weapon's mechanical simplicity, its robust construction, its evident reliability. It would include measurements and specifications. It would describe the ammunition's armor-penetrating capability and the implications for German light vehicles. It would conclude, with characteristic German precision, that the M2 Browning represented a weapon system optimally designed for mass production and tactical versatility, possessed in quantities that make it a decisive factor in American tactical superiority. What the report could not capture was the psychological reality that every German soldier facing American forces had learned. The distinctive sound of M2 fire meant death at ranges German weapons couldn't match, meant friendly armor was vulnerable, meant defensive positions were penetrable, meant aircraft were in mortal danger. The weapon had become the physical manifestation of American material superiority, present everywhere, seemingly in unlimited numbers, mechanically reliable, devastatingly effective. The examination at that French depot provided the technical confirmation of what German forces already knew from bitter experience. The M2 Browning wasn't just another weapon. It was a force multiplier that fundamentally altered tactical calculations. It was industrial philosophy made steel, designed for mass production, optimized for reliability over precision, effective in multiple roles rather than specialized for one. And most significantly, it was produced in numbers that made it unavoidable. Hermann Goering's reported statement, whether genuine or apocryphal, that the Battle of Britain might have turned out differently if Germany had possessed the Browning .50 caliber, captured a truth that extended far beyond air combat. The M2 represented a philosophical approach to warfare that Germany never fully embraced, that overwhelming numbers of reliably effective weapons trump smaller numbers of specialized, superior weapons, that protecting one's own forces matters as much as destroying enemy forces, that industrial capacity and design for mass production are military capabilities as important as tactical brilliance or individual courage. The M2 Browning entered service in 1933. 12 years later, it helped defeat the most militarily advanced nation in Europe. 73 years after that, as of 2024, it remains in frontline service with the United States military and dozens of allied nations. No other weapon system has maintained nearly a century of continuous combat service. Modern conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan saw M2 Brownings, some manufactured during World War II, providing fire support for operations against modern adversaries. The design has proven so fundamentally sound that significant modification has never been necessary. The weapon that German troops called the most feared proved to be something more than its tactical effects alone would suggest. It demonstrated that American industrial philosophy, designing for mass production, prioritizing reliability and versatility, accepting greater weight for improved durability, distributing firepower throughout the force structure rather than concentrating it in a single weapon, could translate industrial capacity into battlefield dominance. It proved that one supremely effective weapon produced in overwhelming numbers can defeat more sophisticated weapons produced in limited quantities. The M2 Browning's 9 decades of service represent more than mechanical excellence. They represent vindication of a design philosophy that prioritized battlefield effectiveness over engineering elegance, mass production over artisanal precision, and tactical versatility over specialized optimization. John Moses Browning died in 1926, 7 years before his final machine gun design entered service. He never saw it in combat, never witnessed its tactical dominance, never learned that it would become the longest-serving weapon system in military history. But standing in that depot yard in September 1944, examining a weapon that his nation had no equivalent for and could not produce in comparable numbers, Wilhelm Hauptmann understood what Browning had created. Not just a machine gun, but a symbol of an industrial philosophy that would define modern warfare. The ability to design one weapon effective in multiple roles, mass-produce it in numbers that make it unavoidable, and distribute it throughout military forces, rather than concentrating it in specialized units. The M2 Browning didn't win World War II, but it exemplified the principles that did: industrial capacity, design for mass production, tactical versatility, mechanical reliability, and overwhelming material superiority. German forces never encountered just one M2. They faced thousands simultaneously, mounted on every American vehicle, emplaced at every American position, carried by every American unit. It created a tactical reality that German doctrine had no answer for, because German doctrine presumed that heavy weapons would be concentrated in specialized units, not distributed throughout the force structure. The examination of captured weapons at that French depot in 1944 revealed the technical specifications that made the M2 effective. But the real revelation came from the simple mathematics of production and distribution. Nearly 2 million weapons, deployed across every theater, mounted on every vehicle, available to every unit. American industrial philosophy made the M2 unavoidable, and unavoidable was more important than superior. The weapon German troops feared most wasn't the best weapon on the battlefield, it was the weapon they encountered at every battlefield, in numbers that made tactical avoidance impossible, and tactical countermeasures futile. That is why 91 years after entering service, the M2 Browning remains in frontline use. That is why it became the weapon German soldiers feared most. And that is why it stands as perhaps the most successful weapon design in military history. Not because it was the most advanced, but because it was effective enough, reliable enough, versatile enough, and producible enough to be everywhere, always, in numbers that transform tactical possibility into strategic certainty. The lesson remains valid today. Battlefield dominance comes not from having the best weapon for every situation, but from having one exceptional weapon for every situation, and producing it in numbers that make it inescapable.